All right. Well, good morning again, and welcome to Doing Restorative Justice today. We are so excited to have you all here with us. My name is Reba Collins, and my co-presenter today is Jamie Nathan, and a little bit later on, we're going to be joined by ODRC victim advocate Lori King. For a practical discussion with somebody who practices restorative justice in her work with the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. So we're just going to jump right in this morning, and Jamie and I will just ping pong, and we are going to have lots of good discussion as well, because what we want to do is really create a learning environment for all of us. We truly believe that each one of you brings with you experience actually in doing restorative justice. You may just not have known that that's what you were doing, or you may not have had the language to explain what it was that you are doing. But if you are with individuals on their healing journey, if you respect people, if you value relationship, and if you help people to be accountable, and if you're accountable for your own actions, then in a lot of ways you are doing restorative justice today. I will say that restorative justice, that language is most often associated with in the sphere that many of us operate in, which is with justice, criminal justice involved persons. When a person has offended and when somebody has been offended or has been harmed. So restorative justice comes out of that framework. But as with a lot of things that actually work over time, people start to take those practices and those principles and apply them in additional settings. So you will see restorative justice being done in school settings, in classrooms, in juvenile facilities, working with folks that are in poverty, those kind of things. So you will see restorative justice being used in a variety of settings. And we'll talk a little bit about that and why that's so powerful, and why it works so well, regardless of whether a crime, quote unquote, a crime has been identified. We always encounter situations where somebody has been harmed and somebody has done the harm, right? So that we hope that today you will not only look at restorative justice as specific to that narrow piece of working with people who've experienced crime or have committed crimes, but also even in our own families and in our communities. So having said that, welcome. Welcome. We hope you will be open, authentic, as in being willing to speak honestly and to bring some of your own experiences, engaged, comfortable with being uncomfortable. Some of this is going to reveal things about ourselves that we may not have known. Some of those blind spots that have actually now become big spots for us. So let's be comfortable with being uncomfortable, non-judgmental and understanding. So let's have just positive regard for each other, that we come with good intentions into this space. Jamie, do you want to say a few words about this?
Yeah, this is one of the new things this year that we are offering, and we're really excited about, is continuing education units or certificates of participation. For those who need continuing education units, we can now use this for you as a tool for professional development, and we are really excited about that. But of note, and Reba hinted at this earlier, is that if you are participating with us today through that component, where you want continuing education units, we will need to have your video camera on at all times, unless you need to step away for an emergency or something. Audio, obviously, you can remain muted unless you are talking. We understand that, but this allows for easy verification that you were there and you were participating, because all employers do want to make sure that you do that. So we thank you, and please share this information. It's going to be available on all of our trainings offered this year and moving forward.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Jamie, this is you.
This is me. So as we get started down our road today, let us just take a moment to have a quick prayer to get us a little more centered, okay? Gracious God, we thank you for this time that we're coming together to share, to learn, and to grow. This is a heavy topic, Lord, on restorative justice, and we come with open minds and open hearts to glean what we can to move forward and do your work according to your will. We thank you for bringing us together, Lord, and we ask that you be with us during this time that we are sharing. Amen.
Yes, amen.
I am a huge advocate of being open to everything around you and learning and gleaning from that, whether it is secular or in the church setting or a ministry setting. I'm always open to hear something or see something that can affect me. And I attended a Genesis concert a couple weeks ago on literally last moment. And maybe that's for a reason. One of the songs that they sung was called Land of Confusion. And I think right now, based on the world that we live in, these words, though 20, almost 30 years old now, still ring true. There's too many men and too many people making too many problems. And there's not much love to go around. Can't you see this is a land of confusion? Now, this is the world we live in, and these are the hands we're given. Use them and let's start trying to make it a place worth fighting for. And I thought that was just so appropriate to come into talking about restorative justice, peacemaking, bridge building, that this was very appropriate that I wanted to share today. So as we move forward, we're in a land of confusion. Being affected by crime and the criminal justice system's response to crime brings people into a land of confusion. There are so many questions, so many unclear paths forward for those who are families, with those who are incarcerated, sometimes even with the legal system. There's lots of questions. Puzzle pieces, right out of a box, can create the same kind of confusion for those, especially who have sensory problems, because there's no clear picture. You're just looking at lots of little things with no understanding. So it can be very frustrating and very hard to process. So with that, I'd like to start today with a little bit of a focus exercise. We kind of come from a lot of confusion in our own paths that we walk. I know I'm an educator working at a career center with adults right now, and it's changing daily on protocols, just dealing with COVID. So every day is a new day, every day is a new frustration, more confusion. So if we can turn for a moment, I'd like you to close your eyes and simply listen to some scripture. You've seen a lot of puzzle pieces. You've seen and heard about confusion in our world, in our society, in our communities. So let's listen to a little bit of scripture and reflect upon it. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Psalm 23 brings comfort no matter how or what you are mourning or you are grieving, the loss of a loved one, a way of life, a relationship. All of these examples bring confusion and change to your life, but being restored is important. So today, as we talk about and start to talk about restorative justice, how did this scripture make you feel?
Well, it's interesting to me that had the funeral not been canceled because of the weather, I would have been reciting that same scripture probably at the same moment. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's God showing us that he's present here for this training, because I didn't, because of my schedule, I couldn't be here today until the very last minute. I use it as comfort and understanding. And that, as in other scripture, like John 14, we're told not to be afraid. And this is comforting to know that God is with us. And I think the problem with a lot of people that I deal with in the justice system is that they feel like they're all alone. And what that scripture does, I think it just reinforces God's obedience to us, faithfulness to us. So to me, it's about comfort and understanding.
Thank you. Anyone else for a reflection?
I
Go
would,
ahead, Kathy.
I would piggyback on what Dave said, that the idea of comfort, hope, and then at the same time, a wondering, like, we can believe this, but how do we access it? What's the connection? How is this? It's almost like too good to be true, the ideal. So then taking what we read and hear from the psalmist and then saying, how does this manifested in my life? And how do I see this in the world? And so trying to bring that ideal into a current reality. So I get caught. My feeling is, oh yes, let it be so. How does this happen?
Hope springs forward. Definitely hope. Anyone else? Offering hope in confusing and frustrating times is what we need. And I know even going through our objectives for what we want to bring to you today, that can also be a little daunting, especially when you start diving into the United Methodist Church's social principles. That can bring about some confusion. I'd like to welcome Mary to the table. Welcome, Mary. We're glad you finally got connected.
Just like to say too, going back to that offering of hope in times of confusion, right? So as we start to kind of move into what restorative practices is, it is not a problem solving approach, right? And sometimes we think that our role in walking with people who've experienced harm or who have harmed is to solve, right? To solve them or to solve the situation or to make sure that pathway forward is as painless as possible. And quite frankly, that's an obligation that we don't need to take on. And we'll talk about obligation in a little bit. In fact, when we try and solve the problem or make that path less painful with information and doing for, then we rob people of their agency for reconciliation and for healing. So just keep those couple things in mind as we move forward. So our objectives today are to explore, the United Methodist. We do have social principles for those of you who are Methodist. And so we're just going to touch on those briefly and connect the dots, because oftentimes I think we look at our principles and they're like out there in la la land, they're woo, 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 woo. And so we really want to use some of our time to really kind of make that connection of, yes, these are things that the church itself has studied, has given significant theological thought to, and has landed on as ways that we should show up in the world. We're going to define what restorative justice is and its potential to be a solution to individual and community healing. And right there, I just said our role isn't to solve, but by using restorative justice practices and principles, solutions can arise within the community and the individual. We're going to apply these to the church's work of reconciliation and redemption in the face of this world that has significant woundedness, and not only from individual to individual, but systems. Right? Systems can be harmful. And so when we think about restorative justice, we need to look at the causes of crime. And then learn the basic understanding of restorative justice framework and some basic ministry practices that we're going to explore with our guest victims advocate, who's going to be joining us a little bit later. Are there any things that you all would like to add? If so, you can put those in the chat or just briefly voice those out loud, because again, this is a learning community. So one of our social principles, and this is out of paragraph 165, which is the world community. We say that we will promote restorative justice strategies to support positive social change and peace building. So this particular piece of our principles really connects peace building to restorative justice. And so what is one of the outcomes of restorative justice work in the church and in our communities and among individuals is peace should start to be evident of, right? So that is incredibly important. And then positive social change. So I know sometimes we chafe against these kind of things because we're really not sure where we're headed and what we're going for. But why would we not all want to work toward positive social change and peace building? Right? Why would we not want to bring more of that into our world? And so as we go along, when we look at restorative justice practices and strategies and approaches, think about this is your equipping to be better at peace building and at making positive social change. And then in the social principle on the political community, which actually has a particular paragraph H, is around criminal and restorative justice. And so this is what our United Methodist Church says, is that we urge that creation of genuinely new system of care and restoration for all parties that are involved in the criminal justice system, including justice officials themselves. And so what I hope that you will come to see as we go along is that, new systems, what we're talking about are human systems. And how do we create new systems is we create them through human actions. And so it's really up to us as individuals to provide alternatives to retributive systems, to harmful systems, by working together and creating new systems of care and restoration. Because otherwise, culture and society thinks that it's solving what is happening, and we know that that's not true. So unless we provide an alternative through our own actions, behaviors, and collective work, the system that is currently in place will continue to exist. And so what we're really talking about is the fundamental work of culture change. So at the back of all of this, restorative justice helps us to shift culture because it helps us develop new value systems, new belief systems, and new behavior systems in place that support a more reparative approach to crime and incarceration and harm in our communities. So we love this book. Our All In Community team is reading this book until we reckon, and we're going slowly through it because it's so dense and so rich, but we totally recommend it to anybody who is doing restorative justice and wants to step into the restorative justice space. And so what we're really calling you to do today is new ways of thinking and acting with one another through the restorative justice approach. Oh, look at that. And so this is another, good job, Jamie. So what I love about this book too is it encourages us, right? Communities have long had the capacity to address the pain that arises within them. The more we can get into what is called the basic social organization, which is the community, and that can be the family community, it could be the organizational community, it could be the larger community at whole, is that we have this inherent ability as human beings to participate in transforming that harm. And that's what restorative justice really works toward. So our group discussion, and this again, we're small enough that we can just unmute and have a small discussion around how do we as community respond when someone we know has been harmed or experiences pain from a broken relationship. So this is trying to draw out the wisdom that we already do this when people die, when divorce happens, when our children experience. So how do we, in those times when we know someone has experienced harm or experienced some kind of level of pain, like life-shifting pain, how do we respond?
How do we respond, or how should we respond?
How do we respond and let's focus on how do we respond that is restorative or repairing, because we can respond in in more harmful ways. Right. Right. But I want us to surface that wisdom of how do we do this well?
We often rally round. We offer a lot of presents, not gifts, presents, but although those are gifts too, but just the idea that you think if somebody dies and those who care about that loved one will be present with food, with cards, with expressions of sympathy, and the inner circle will follow up and be in constant or in consistent contact to and we give a lot of grace to folks who've experienced pain. Like we lower our social expectation, if you will. Like I don't expect someone whose mother just died to show up fully present at the next activity.
Yeah.
So I allow, we allow time for that grieving to take place. I think that time and presence is something I think when we do it well, is striking. And oftentimes, in my experience, I've heard non-believers or non-church folks be amazed at how well church folk care for people who have been hurt.
Yeah.
In its best.
Yes, in its best.
Always in the best, because we all know ways that we don't do it well. So
right. Very true. That's excellent. Other thoughts?
I have found that during the times when someone has lost someone and you're talking with them is to try to help them think of all of the good memories that they did have,
Mm.
and I experienced death this year very closely. I lost my son in March, and it was a difficult time of dealing with that, along with trying to help keep the family together. So bringing my inner strength and believing in faith and believing in God to try to help keep them together, and also try to talk to my husband to keep him from being so mad, because he was
Mm.
very, very mad.
Mm.
So it kind of helps pull out your inner strength of your faith of how you believe, when you have to be the one to be the strong one to help pull everyone else out.
Mm. Mm. Patience, we are so sorry for the loss of your son.
Thank you. Thank you.
That as parents, we that's not the natural order of things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And so we are so sorry for that.
Thank you. Thank you. He was in a motorcycle accident, and
Mm.
he was 24, and 8 days later he would have been turning 25. He has a twin sister. We have a daughter, and
Mm.
so we had plans, and we still did them. I told him that he would not want us to continue with her day because it was still her day.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
You.
Anyone else from your own experience? Or
I think one thing coming from a Stephen ministry background is just simply listening.
Mm.
Letting the person talk, or the people talk, and being that listening ear with no judgment, just
Yeah.
listening.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right.
I think I would just add that we need to be in a community to respond.
Mm.
If
Mm.
a lot of us try to respond as individuals,
Mm-hmm.
and what using the church experience, your church home teaches us as individuals to not be stigmatic about the issue, to be intentional in our listening and our caring, and be intentional in our presence with those people that are experiencing things that we may not have any experience with, but being harmed is being harmed. Pain is pain. And
Mm.
brokenness is brokenness. And one of the things that I'm so proud of having a church family is those people have taught me through the years how to do this.
Mm.
And how we learn how to do it is by someone else harming us more while we're still experiencing the harm or pain that we've been given,
Mm.
or that we're experiencing. And the funeral home is a great example of how people, because they're not in community that they've been taught, may very well say something to the people that are experiencing the loss, which makes it worse rather than better.
Right.
So the question is, we as individuals, we need to be in community, so we respond appropriately.
Mm. Very
And
good.
and our social justice guidelines are not meant to be perfect, but being a Methodist, there's a method for everything. And I thank God for those that have gone before us that have written these things down as a template for us to use. It doesn't fit every circumstance, but as individuals, we can at least read it and understand the people that have gone before us and their wisdom on this topic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dave, what you just said about being in community and how that helps us, do this better. How we show up is incredibly important, right? And if we have not had some processing of our own and have not been treated well, right? When we've been harmed or experienced pain, then one of our responses is to try and push all pain away, right? And so when we show up with somebody who has experienced harm and pain, and we try to diminish that or neutralize that for our own comfort, that's when we do it wrong.
Right.
That's when we do it wrong. So, so part of this is, developing our ability and our capacity in community to be able to hold presence in very painful situations. And that requires us to do our healing as well. Before we move on, I just wanted to bring some other wisdom into this. I was watching a documentary this week on Netflix, and Gloria Steinem, the women's rights advocate, social advocate for so many years, was talking about healing. And she was talking about the Me Too movement and how movements come to be. And she said something that I thought was very, very profound. She said that the final stage of healing is to use what happened to you to help other people. And so I want us to keep that in mind, because with restorative justice work, that is part of what we are doing. When we talk about what does restoration look like, it looks like that healing to the point of using what has happened to us to help other people.
Right.
So just a quick kind of look at where culturally we tend to view justice, particularly in the criminal justice system, and then what restorative justice, so the juxtaposition of these. So contemporary retributive justice makes the state as the victim, right? You have prosecutors, you have judges, you have criminal justice professionals. They all represent the state. The state has been harmed. In biblical restorative justice, people, communities, shalom has been violated. All right. In retributive justice, wrong as a violation of the rules. We said earlier that not all harmful acts are criminal, and not all criminal acts are caught either. Based on rules and all kinds of other systems. Also in retributive justice focuses on guilt and kind of these abstract principles of, you get what you get, or justice is served because you get it. And then justice is tested by rules and procedures. And then justice is divided into areas, each with kind of these different rules. So it's all very regulatory. Retributive is very regulatory in nature. And I think we see how this does not serve true justice, right? Victims do not feel that justice has really been served if it's only viewed from this lens. For example, there was a recent article in our paper down here where this family, they had experienced, this gentleman had killed a horrific crime, had killed their child. And he was, sentenced for 30 years, and he was served most of his sentence. He was at 27 years. And he was coming up for parole. Well, in that 27-year period, a lot of the community around this family had passed away, had moved on, and they were so concerned and worried that he was going to be allowed out. And so they did not want him out because they thought justice had not been served, because he had not served all of his time, and no amount of time was ever going to bring that to be. And so I just was reading that article. I thought, they did not have the community around them. Their healing, right, was based on his length of sentence, not on anything that was internal, not on, restoring peace and those kind of things. So in biblical restorative justice, the focus is on the harm done Justice is defined by outcomes of individual transformation and healing and substance and those kind of things. It's justice is seen as an integrative whole of the person and the community and not necessarily on the system itself. And good morning, guest speaker or I guess just our guest, Lori King from the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction Office of Victim Services. So we're just working through some things. So we're glad you joined us a little early. And so maybe you can help us or correct us as we kind of work through things. And then around 11, we will pause and turn to you for some practical guidance and wisdom in our work. Is that okay? All right. Thank you. So when we think about justice, we really cannot look at justice as reconciliation and redemption. All right. We cannot look as justice being served when reconciliation and redemption and that final stage of healing I just spoke about occurs unless we kind of look at universal needs of human dignity. And so this actually comes from an article I was recently reading, and I'll send it to you after this. But basically, research tells us that, and human rights work demonstrates to us that people have three basic needs. They need a sense of belonging, right? And in fact, research shows us that belonging to a community, belonging in community is as urgent of a need as food and water and shelter. That when we operate in isolation or when we are isolated from community, bad things happen, basically. And so it diminishes our spirit because it's tied to our dignity. Having voice is also incredibly important. The need to be heard and have one's experience acknowledged is central to that experience of human dignity. It's central to that experience of feeling that you sit in right relationship with people. And then agency is incredibly important. Having that ability to have say over yourself, over decisions that are in your own best self-interest are incredibly important in that sense of people feeling that justice has been served. So these three things are really important whenever we think about doing our restorative justice work with individuals and also in communities. And when these three things are violated, then injustice is felt. And it's not just felt by the individual that has been violated, but by communities and things like that. So this is just kind of a reflective question. We're really not going to answer it, but it's one that you should answer as you go forward, is how does the retributive approach to justice impact human dignity? And then we will explore a little bit later how the restorative justice approach feeds human dignity and worth. Okay, any questions on that or thoughts? So let's look at what restorative justice is. It is Jamie, whenever you want to jump in, feel free.
You're fine. I figured I'd cover some of this other stuff pretty quick. So.
All right, great. So restorative justice, it's a grassroots movement. And what that means, it's at the lowest level of social organization. So what we mean by social organization, family social organization, groups that you belong to, social organization. Part of your identity is this concept of social organization. So it's grassroots movement. It's not top down. It's not government mandated. It's not government approach. It's not business approach. It's the people. It's the people of the community. It's also a philosophy of criminal justice, as we just talked about, versus the other form of criminal justice. And then it's also a set of tools and understanding and repairing of lives and community. And it's a broad approach to harm or crime, which seeks to heal the harm that has been done. So it's all of these things. Again, when we think about restorative justice in a cultural context, it helps us to shape a culture where everybody can dwell well among each other. In Danielle Sarid's book as well, she talks about prison. The most legitimate form for prisons today is to hold people that the community could not hold safely. So restorative justice it's an approach, it's a practice, it's a philosophy, it's values, it's all those things that create the culture in a community so everybody is held safely. And we know today that a lot of that is not being done. So what it is not, it's not primarily about forgiveness and reconciliation, though those things can be outcomes and byproducts of restorative justice work, but it's not the main focus. It's not pushing people to get there to those things. Though as people of faith, we know that forgiveness unlocks a new level of healing, right? Even when there can be no face-to-face forgiveness, but forgiveness unlocks that healing and draws us closer to the grand creator, the grand compassionate person, God. But it's not the primary thing. And sometimes we can use restorative justice as the means to those ends. And when that happens, we're creating more harm. It's not about a return to past circumstances. Surely by now, 2 years into this pandemic, we know that the past circumstances are not going to be occurring. We are never going to get back to where we are. All we can do is to keep moving forward and to create, again, using we have experienced and what has happened to us to help others, to help ourselves form new life. God's always creating new life. And so it helps us embrace that. It's not mediation. And Lori, whenever we get to our conversation, I would love for you to kind of talk a little bit about the difference and how mediation is different than really restorative justice practice. And it's not primarily designed to reduce recidivism or repeat offenses, though when we do restorative justice well, we are also looking at the causes of why that crime occurs or why that offense happens. And in that way, we are crafting new systems. And in many ways, whenever restorative justice really works well, you see that transformation in that person who has caused the harm. And that, of course, contributes to them not going back and doing the same thing over again. But again, we don't use it just to get those two outcomes. It's not a program or a blueprint. Again, it's a culture. It's not limited to minor offenses or first-time offenders. If you do read Until We Reckon, Danielle Sarid's restorative justice work is with people who've caused significant harm, murder, assaults of all kinds. So it's not just to those minor offenses. It's not necessarily a replacement of the legal system. There is a place for the legal system to occur because, quite frankly, some people, simply because of past experiences and wounds, cannot be held safely in community. They just can't. It's beyond the community's capacity to do that. It's not necessarily an alternative to prison either. It kind of goes with the other one, and not necessarily the opposite of retribution. So again, it's a whole lot of stuff, but it's certainly not those things. So, but what it is Jamie, what is it?
It's needs and roles. It's around needs and roles of 3 specific groups of people. Victims, or those who have been harmed. Offenders, those are the ones who have caused the harm. And communities as well, those who are affected by both sides of the issue. And talking about victims specifically, victims have needs that are typically neglected from the criminal justice system. You know, truth telling has to be part of their experience. And quite often, and I'm sure Lori will attest to this, they get shut down or are left out of the process to a certain extent. And they also don't get communicated with the status of their cases or anything that's going on. They need to have empowerment to be involved in the process, to know what is going on, and restitution or vindication for the crime that is against them. When we have offenders, offenders are those who have caused harm and are punished for their behavior, but they also need to be held responsible. Having worked inside the regional correctional facility up in Northwest Ohio, I understand that a lot of times these people are not held accountable for their actions. Helping them to understand they need to be held accountable. And understand that it's okay to experience personal transformation in order to heal through that accountability. And we will say it a couple of times later on, is that hurt people hurt people. So when you're looking at offender, at some point they have been hurt as well. And so encouragement to understand and reckon with that is important. They also need encouragement and support to reintegrate into the community. Reentry is a huge step. And listening to stories of success and stories of failure on reentry is very powerful. And we need to give them the ability to be able to reintegrate successfully through their comeback.
That goes to that human dignity, need of belonging, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so when we don't belong, then we oftentimes will act out, or we will try and exercise our own agency. In fact, Kathy said the other day to me, Kathy Harrington, who's with us this morning, said that sometimes people act in a harmful way because what they're trying to do is regain agency.
Mhm.
Right? They're trying to exercise agency, and they're trying to figure out where they do belong and exercise that. So this is really important. Kathy also wanted me to unpack just a minute, holding people safely in community. So when we think about the larger community, there are communities where people live who don't have access to certain things that they need to be successful, right? Mental health is one of them. Having the ability to get a good education in an environment that is nurturing, as opposed to, and sometimes retributive. When we bring in things like our own bias and racism, and we isolate people, again, it goes back to that isolation piece. Somebody does not feel safe out on an island on their own. So holding people safely is not only about meeting it's about a holistic approach to meeting needs, to people feeling like they are in community that is for them and isn't benign or against them. So part of the work of restorative justice, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, is what are the causes of offense. And that makes us look at, that the community has obligations as well to create a place where everybody can dwell well in that community. I hope that's helpful.
I'm going to go right into communities that you just mentioned. Communities are those people on both sides that are effective. Sometimes you think just of families of victims or families of offenders, but you also have their neighbors. their church members, their schoolmates, classmates, anything like that, that's still part of the community. And we need to create opportunities to build a positive community for both victims and offenders to be able to be made whole again and restore their dignity through a challenging time.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes that community just starts with those individuals around the victims and the offenders, right? What are those communities like? And so that means family, that means pro-social friends, those kind of things. So, so don't think of community. And I tend to get into this space of the big community with all the huge systems and structures. There are opportunities for us in our communities to get work again at that most basic level, in our schools as well, with our youth, all those kind of things, in our churches even. I will say, as communities, as those micro communities that make up the larger community. So kind of think about it in that way.
Stakeholders.
Community. I would just add that community is critical, but we can't just think about the new community. These people, all the people I work with, come from a community.
That's right.
That community may be way down on Maslow's hierarchy, and it's dog eat dog, and the strongest survive, and those types of things. Any of us could be and come from that community. I happen to, so I understand it better than most. But born in the suburbs to a affluent middle class, upper middle class family versus being born in the hood. Creates two different communities. And what restorative justice is trying to do is to make a new community that's way different. It's totally different than the old community that a lot of us come from. Yeah,
good point, Dave. Thank you.
So with that, in order to create a good framework, which is what restorative justice really is, it's a framework, we need some pillars of support to give us solid ground and continue to work. So this picture I thought was very meaningful from the book we've been working out of. 3 pillars of restorative justice. Pillar 1 is harms and needs. Understanding that we need to prevent harm as well as justice after the harm has occurred, and understanding and identifying the harms and then turning and looking at the needs. That's one portion or one pillar of that restorative justice focuses on. The second pillar is obligations. I know Reba talked about obligations earlier, and they're not just limited to those directly responsible for the harm, but also to community and to society that we've mentioned. Our victims, our offenders, and the community, they're all stakeholders. They're all the ones working together that have kind of flew right out the door there, sorry. The ones that have to build the new community, but also understand what was there to begin with. They're all part in making everything work and for the healing to begin. And then of course, engagement is the actual involvement with everyone, all the stakeholders involved.
So
create that foundation.
Yeah. So restorative justice is a very collaborative process. It's not just a one-on-one, let's take care of, this one person who's experienced significant harm or this one family. It is a collaborative process with all parties, as much as to the extent that is possible. okay, to the extent that is possible. All parties that have a stake in seeing repair happen, right? And dignity restored to all parties. I think that's incredibly important for us to, and Lori's going to help us maybe understand this a little bit, I hope. So I told Lori 11, so we're at 11:06. So just, in your workbook, you have this working definition of restorative justice. And again, it's a working definition, which means it's not complete. And the completeness comes in the practice that we do in this. And let me just say, give yourself some grace as well, because we're not going to get it right every time. We're not, but as Dave mentioned way in the beginning, but in community, we learn how to do it well and do it better. But it is about putting right the harms. The harm requires that we not only address the harms themselves, but as Jamie said, the cause of the harm or the crime. And it's more than just a person's decision, right?
Mhm.
I tell our group a lot, every bad decision begins with a broken relationship of some kind. Of some kind of broken relationship. And it could be a whole lifetime of broken relationships that has led up to a serious harm. Jamie, you want to say something about that? And then we're going to bring Lori into the conversation.
Yeah, these are three different words. We've mentioned shalom earlier. Ubuntu has come to light as a major word to also think about all rightness. Bishop Desmond Tutu, God rest his soul. He passed just this week, I believe, was the voice that really brought Ubuntu to light for the world in the truth and reconciliation process with South Africa. And that is that being all right with each other, with the creator, and with the environment. Howard Zehr, who is, we'll mention again in a few minutes, a harm to one is a harm to all. And I think that's really what encompasses these three words, three different languages, to putting it right.
Okay. So putting restorative justice principles into practice, that is kind of the next step. This is just a precursor, or just, I guess, an introductory to restorative justice and restorative justice practices and principles. And we really do recommend in your workbook, we give you the book that we have really used for this session this morning. There are others as well that we did, but we are so blessed to have Lori King with us this morning. Last minute notice, last minute request. And so I apologize, Lori, for that last minute stuff, but we were kind of racking our brain thinking, and having met Lori once through Mike Davis at the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, just her spirit is what she brings, not only her expertise and her experience, but her spirit into this space with us this morning. So just a brief introduction of Lori, and then we're going to bring her into the conversation. So Lori is a state victim advocate for the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, and she'll tell us a little bit more about what that is and what that means. She attended Wilberforce University in Wilberforce, Ohio, to obtain her Bachelor of Science degree. She's a regional advocate with advanced standing through the Ohio Advocate Network, a comprehensive credentialed advocate through the National Advocate Credentialing Program with designation of domestic violence and homicide intervention specialist. You got the hard stuff. There, Lori. She serves as vice president on the board of trustees for the National Organization Parents of Murdered Children Incorporated, which is housed, the national group is here in Cincinnati. She's an active member of the Greater Cincinnati, Ohio chapter of the Parents of Murdered Children and Central Ohio chapter. She's a dedicated victim advocate serving crime victims in Ohio for 25 years in memory of her sibling, Geneva Ann Odell, who was brutally murdered on August 12, 1994. So, Lori, we so appreciate you coming and sharing your wisdom, your experience, and yourself with us this morning. And we are just honored and blessed to be in your presence. So having said that, if you would please just kind of tell us a little bit about what it is that you do, the work that you do, and how restorative justice approach feeds into that. Lori, we can hardly hear you. And we want to. Can you turn your volume up just a little, maybe?
Oh, goodness.
Okay, I'm terrible at that sort of thing, so I apologize. I'm not sure what to do. It's really low, I assume. Very, very low. And
We can hear you a little bit better.
maybe I'll just talk up a little bit. Sure. I go over here to speaker, and it won't really let me change the.
There you go. There you go.
That sounded good. Oh,
Just keep your face right there.
And I don't have anybody here that can help me with this, so we're gonna try to get through it. I apologize. But any rate, yeah, I cover Southwest Ohio with the Department of Corrections as an advocate for Southwest Ohio, and work with crime victims every single day. But you know, there's a lot of things that our office does as far as, you know, the focus possibly on restorative justice. And when I look back and think about that, I think about at the very beginning, 1996, when our Office of Victim Services came to the Department of Corrections. Because before that, crime victims would not really have any other information when it goes to, you know, a notification and things like that of an offender or an offender. So before that, that's what was going on. But now, you know, from that day moving forward, and I've pretty much been here at the beginning of it all. But so, you know, we do our best to make sure. Have their voices and the, you know, that you know, an offender is getting, where we connect them to the services and resources back in their community to know who to get a hold of if they need a protection order or want to connect up, you know, with the parole officer who's supervising the offender so they can share their concerns, you know, before that release. And, you know, we certainly do not give them, you know, information like addresses or anything like that, but we certainly empower them and give them some information as to what area the offender will be supervised in by knowing who the parole officer is in those areas. Certainly Certainly, we have opportunities for them to speak up at parole board hearings when an offender is coming for a release consideration hearing. And we give them, appointments. We set up appointments as needed so they can meet with the parole board on those sort of things. We give their input, to the parole. Those are just a little tip of the iceberg of things that certainly full board hearings is another one. When an offender is then opportunity to speak up again to the entire parole board. Have their voice heard. And if the offender is again released to back into the community, that connection with being able to talk to a parole officer.
Thank you. And we can hear you a large percentage of the time, so that is good. No, that's okay. That's okay. So, I think hopefully Jamie sent you some information kind of about, respect in our book, the little book of restorative justice. Howard Zare talks about that, respect is the key to putting things right, and so if you could, and these were two different images that he gave in the book, and that, that you have the addressing of obligations, involving stakeholders, using inclusive collaborative processes, focusing on harms and needs. It probably starts with focusing on harms and needs. How do you see, and maybe some of this is your work with parents of murdered children as well. How do you kind of get to kind of each one of these, or are there some that you focus more on than others in your work and in your and in your volunteer work with victims?
So you're talking about on the left side of the screen where it has the respect all.
Yes.
Boxes. Okay, so by focusing on the harms and the needs, certainly being able to listen to a crime victim and about the impact that crime has had on them, and then thinking about resources that would be available and help them. So I think it's very, very important for people to be heard and to be listened to, and for us to be respectful and hear what they have to say and try to help them with their needs, giving them resources and things like that. So those are certainly some avenues that we can help with. And then by addressing on the other side, I assume, is that also the obligations?
Yes.
On the offender side of things. So when we look at that, thinking of how we could address that, has the offender ever apologized or spoke up to, try to, say something and speak up to a crime victim? Things that, we look at and think about is even in the institutions, offenders writing an apology letter is very important. And we don't necessarily, we certainly don't connect them back to the victim. What we do is we allow to let the victim know, hey, we found an apology letter on file. Would you be interested in it? And so that way they can hear from them, about that obligation and how, what their input is if they sit in an apology letter. Other ways addressing the obligation, certainly back to the very beginning, thinking about, their actions, what their actions were, and addressing the obligation by whatever the justice system says is the right thing to do. Whether it means that the offender is to serve time in prison, in the jail, county jails, things such as that, and that responsibility and that obligation to take responsibility for their actions.
But I want to pause on that just a little bit, particularly the apology letter. Danielle Sari talks about doing sorry, right? And for victims, she makes the claim that for the majority of victims, what they want first, they want to be vindicated by the person who caused them harm taking the responsibility, right? And then doing sorry as in trying to put things right, and as in so you say you're sorry, now you have to show me, right? Now you have to show me you're sorry. And so what does that mean? What does that really mean for, even if all a victim hears is sorry, I know what I did was incredibly harmful to you. How important is that for a victim?
From everything that I've worked with victims for over 25 years now, that's a huge part of it. Are they still acting the same way they did as before? Did they really, their actions, writing a letter of I'm sorry, what have you done, to be able to show us that? So by showing this, that would be maybe doing some programming while you're incarcerated, maybe doing things right while you're in there, abiding by the rules, not getting in trouble, taking actions such as that is very important to crime victims, more than a lot of people realize. So it is very important. We do want to know what they've been doing, what they've been up to, how they got into trouble. Those are key things, for crime victims to feel like, okay, they are doing something, changing the road they were on, possibly, and making a difference, in some way.
Yeah.
So that is
Yeah.
important.
And I know we have several people who work with those who have caused harm, maybe not to the extent that you experienced personally, but when we go back to that concept of like dignity and agency, I hear a lot of folks who've been through the incarceration process and experience of, we just want to be treated as humans. We just want to be seen as humans, right? And in that, underneath that is that whole thing of human dignity, of being acknowledged, of belonging, and all those things. And kind of through that lens with restorative justice, one of the agency things that a person who's caused harm can do is to apologize, right? So in our work with those who have caused harm, we are helping them restore their dignity when we encourage them to take that responsibility to accept the obligations of their sentence and what they have to do to work towards those changes, and to apologize for their behavior, even if it's a written letter that never gets read, right? Then that helps in their own restoration and their own dignity. Would you agree with that? Yeah. Okay.
And I don't know whether you'll get to this. I'm sure you will. I'm probably stepping ahead, but the forgiveness portion of it. A lot of times, an offender thinks that they need to get that forgiveness from someone else, but they need to work on the forgiveness from their portion of it, and that way they can move forward and do change that path possibly. Some victims are not ready. Some victims, it takes quite some time before they would be, but it's not their responsibility or ownership to be able to say, oh, I have to do this for the person who harmed me.
Yeah. And those that harm can do everything right? They can meet the obligations and things. And sometimes I hear that there's that expectation that I did everything that was asked, I apologized, and they expect that forgiveness then from the victim. And I think in our work with those on both sides is that we have to be that wisdom and walk through people. What does really true forgiveness mean and look like? That may never come to pass, that you may never hear from your victim that you are forgiven. But that doesn't mean that you can't keep moving forward, and that, that God doesn't forgive you, that you can't forgive yourself. So, because boy, if that's the expectation, if those that have caused harm hold it, that's what's going to be the end result, then disappointment's going to be hard and failure's going to kick in, and it may, and so I think we have to be very careful in working with those obligations of helping folks to have the right expectations with individuals. And that comes to, involving stakeholders and using that inclusive collaborative process. So how do you involve stakeholders? And maybe this isn't so much in your state work, but in your volunteer work with parents of murdered children. How does that organization develop, involve the stakeholders in the community when somebody is murdered and you have that family in that community? Does that make sense?
Yes. And I look at it two different lenses here, as you're saying, the Parents of Murdered Children organization, but also I think about the Department of Correction. So I have to blend those two together and share something with you. So we have a program within the Department of Correction called Victim Awareness. It's a wonderful opportunity for offenders to actually hear from crime victims. So they actually, we put the Office of Victim Services developed the curriculum for it, and they bring, an awareness to the offenders of the harm that has been done to crime victims. And then we partner with other agencies in the community. So we bring those agencies in to talk to those offenders.
Wow.
They could be a crime victim of a robbery. And that crime victim might share, the offender might think, oh gosh, that, I didn't hurt anybody. Nobody, was harmed, but they don't realize the harm they really did. And so then that person, it empowers the community person to be able to share that information. And it also empowers the offenders to look at and realize, wow, this, I never thought about it that way. But also, you bring those two together, it is just a very powerful experience as to the partnership, and for some of those advocates or survivors of crime to go in and to a prison and see real people. Because when they go in and see the real people that are incarcerated, then they look at things differently. Sometimes, people think, oh, they're just all terrible. There's lots of really horrible folks in there. And then they actually come together and they see them in a different perspective sometimes. Not always, but they are still honest and real when they share, because a lot of times we always hear, oh, what about forgiveness? Have you forgiven the person who harmed you? Or what about upcoming parole board hearings? Are you still going to speak up at the parole board hearings and things like that? But they get the real answers, and it goes back and forth. But that partnership is a wonderful thing. So again, that's one perspective of that. Other things, like I said, in the communities, the awareness out there about what has happened to the loved ones, and speaking with the different agencies to bring that awareness to that. I like something that David said earlier regarding the pillars, the different pillars. And I love the fact that you said the new pillar for that holds up, everything in the community and restorative justice, because this is a new when the offenders, actions change their life, when a crime victim is impacted by their actions, and when the community is impacted by it. It is a whole new world. It changes everything and all the dynamics that were there before. So I think that's very important to look at that perspective and think about it in that way. What can we do in a different, in this realm that we're in?
Wow. That's really good. Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody have any questions for Lori right now? Particularly anything she said? And you can unmute and ask. I'm interested in how would a group or individuals be part of that inside piece that you talked about? What, even if they're like a surrogate victim, how, because that could be a pathway for again, victims to use the experience that they've had to help others. Right. So how would that, how do we maybe step into that space?
I think by certainly listening to what the victim has to say, and then, some of the things, how can we help that person? Maybe there are some things that, we look at. Certainly there are resources out there for, someone getting out of prison, and those awesome resources. What I do oftentimes, to be honest with you, is when I'm working with a crime victim, I look at the different resources that are offered for offenders too. And I look and think, okay, what about housing, or what about things like that? But the surrogate person in that perspective could be that person who is that worked and listens to what they have to say, and the tools that they can provide to a crime victim in the community.
Mary, you raised your hand, I saw.
Mary, you have to unmute.
I'm sorry, I apologize. So I guess my question would be, you kind of summed it up when you're talking about listening. I'm part of a mentor program and actually going on the inside. And sometimes it's hard to actually get some of the women to open up about some of these issues because of things that they're going through with like oppression from like racism or just childhood trauma. Do you have any suggestions on like how to kind of like get them to open up so that I would be able to listen? That would probably be huge for me. We have good participation, but I would like for people to know that it's a safe space and that they can share, and that it is, that there are people listening and that we do care. We are integrating respect and empathy and sympathizing with them. So I was wondering if you had any, ideas about how to do that.
Mary, I think that's an awesome thing that you're doing, going in there and being able to speak up and helping, folks the things that they're going through. And I think you have to earn trust. I think that's a huge part of it. So sometimes, when you're in there, you're sharing what you're providing to them. They may not be receptive right away because you know what? Just like we were saying earlier, what are your actions? Let's see how your actions are for, what we're sharing, a little piece that we're sharing with you, and what are you doing with that? So the fact that you are listening to them and providing them information, and it may just be simply that trust level that they just need to see from you for a while. So at first you'll be surprised after a while how that will go. I've had crime victims before I've worked with, and they're like, no, don't want anything to do with you. And I'm like, you know what? Let me just give you my card. Okay, let me just give you my card. You may not need me this time, but if you ever need me, I want you to have my card. It might be 6 months. It might have been a year later, and I'll get a phone call. And I'm like, hey, I remember you, and I remember you gave me this card. And you help me with this situation or that situation. And I think that's what you're going to find as you listen to what they have to say and gain their trust. I think that's the biggest part of all of it.
Thank you so much. I wrote down so much just now. Thank you.
Oh,
And Mary, using affective statements and affective questions draws out and it establishes that trust factor. So affective statements are, it's not simply saying, thank you for sharing, but more of an encouraging thing of, wow, I really learned so much from what you just said, right?
Just
So-
what she did, yes.
Right. And so it's not just kind of affirming the behavior, but really taking what was said and applying it to how it impacted you. So, and so we have actually a training at the end of the month on affective statements and restorative practices. And so we can give you some tools on that if you want to attend that. And then affective questions. So instead of saying, what happened, you can say, well, what did you think when you realized that happened? Right? Instead of, well, what were you thinking at the time? You can say, what impact did that incident or did that scenario have on you and others? So it's kind of getting them to form emotional connection. And then Mary, I would say too, if you have a good group and you are trained in what's called the circle process, that is a great tool for bringing equity and vulnerability into a space to get people to, it's really about practicing listening and affirming and having space for people to have voice as well. So those three things are tools in the restorative justice practices that you can bring into that space.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that workshop at the end of the month, and because we are working with circles, and it's a mentorship, and they're going to be able to, it's kind of like a seamless transition that we're providing. They'll have employment opportunities to interview while they're incarcerated, and then they'll have housing. So they'll have guaranteed employment and housing when they leave through this program called Jumpstart, which started out of South Carolina. And I'm working with 4-7 in Cincinnati. The 4-7 in Cincinnati, we're the first ones to pilot it in Ohio, and we're doing the first pilot program at Dayton Correctional Institution. And so it's a 40-week program. We've been going in for the past 2.5 months, training the mentors. And so then in February is our kickoff, and we start our circles. And I have some of the women who, because I was formerly incarcerated, that do trust me, and especially me coming back in and showing them that, I kept my word and that I'm someone that can be dependable. But you have people that I've never, met before, that are new, that are just getting there and don't really know who I am. And so that's where I'm kind of having a little bit of the openness issue. And me, I'm an open book. I'll tell my story to anyone to give someone hope and to let them know that if I can change my life, then anyone can. You just got to find what works for you. Education and faith was what was my facets that I used to help me reintegrate. So, just trying to keep that momentum, and just, hoping and wishing that some of the newer ones would, see that and become more vulnerable with me. That's my hopes and goals.
Vulnerability is a very scary thing. For people, particularly people who've, and Mary, this, who have had to survive by armoring up. Right. And so,
absolutely.
So, that authenticity and that vulnerability, showing that, as some people, it's too scary. And so just, and I'm sure you'll do a fantastic job of just gauging how you step into that vulnerability space, that also invites the individuals to reciprocate in an equitable way. So that would be my advice.
I was, if I could just jump in here, I'm just impressed with, I'm fortunate to work with victims advocate, Mark Weiner is his name. And I have learned, yeah, you might know Mark. I have learned so much from him, especially on the spiritual side, which may come as a strange comment from a pastor. But I've learned so much about grace from him and his ability to do the kinds of things that he does and you do so well. The thing that jumps out in the work that I do is consistency and time. And all of us are, you know, we want to be doers and we really need to be beers. And that being, in other words, being there when you say you'll be there, being consistent in what your dialogue is with someone and how you are is so critical, because they can see, prison terms, mush fake, they can see mush fake in a heartbeat. So being consistent over time and being real is a very difficult thing for most of us to do. So, so I just commend you for what you do, and thank you for being here and helping us to understand how this process works, because it's not easy. This is such a deep, complex discussion that that we could spend hours and hours on just each piece of it. So thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
So Lori, these are guiding questions of restorative justice from the grandfather or one of the founders of the movement, you know, who's been hurt. And I'm not going to read all of these. My question to you is, and I think sometimes we have the propensity to say, okay, got the questions, now I'm going to go use them, right? How do you work with these questions, not only in preparing yourself to work with victims, those that have been harmed, those that have harmed? You know, to me, it seems like some of it needs to be internally answered first, before they're deployed upon other individuals. So can you talk a little bit about how you maybe work with these questions yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So pretty much on a daily basis, you know, when someone calls me up and we're talking about a situation they have, and I just, you kind of like do the ripple effect of crime. You know, who was harmed, you know, what the next step might be would be another, you know, ripple effect, what needs, what obligations, things like that. So you have to identify certain things before you just listening and taking in information, and then you're ready to go. And then you go ahead and you know, validate and acknowledge what they shared with you. And then you try to figure out, you kick in what needs they may have, and how we can possibly look at helping them, to give them, empower them with resources that they may need, and whose obligations are these. You know, you look at that, and the obligations certainly are with the question of what are the needs. So those are kind of like, you look at that and you're thinking about, okay, what's the next step? Maybe someone contacting a victim, not supposed to be, or whatever. Then we have to like acknowledge that and address that issue. And what, you know, what caused this, you know, would certainly be back with somebody, maybe possibly trying to get a hold of somebody to say, oh, hey, you know, I want to tell you this, I want to, you know, but again, that ripple of, you know, the different ways we can address these situations and the stakeholders affected by this certainly are many. Certainly, because you look at the crime victim, certainly, you know, what the hurt or harm was in the situation, up to, you know, how it's going to affect and impact, and we need to address, you know, with the person who has committed that harm and that hurt to someone. And that ripple effect is contacting somebody and addressing the issue, you know, with that situation and what their actions were. And talking to them about, hey, how can we try to figure out a different path for you to go? You know, maybe go ahead and write that apology letter if you haven't never done it before. You don't have to take a victim awareness program. you write that apology letter or write that letter, write it. Maybe you write it and you tear it back up, whatever. But the fact that, you know, you kind of, you know, have to address that situation in this process.
Yeah. So kind of like in process, thinking about process, not all of these questions are going to be answered through one conversation or two conversations. I mean, it can take a long time to, and in some ways, it's almost like some things still have to be revealed as you go through, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing about being a good listener, because you have to be a good listener to take in all that information and look at different sides.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to switch gears for just a minute. So there's this thing called the social discipline window, and I came upon this through some of my work with restorative practices, and I really like it because it keeps us where we need to be if we apply it. And so in restorative practices, the fundamental hypothesis is that, you know, we are happier as human beings. We're more cooperative, more productive, more likely to make those life changes in our behavior. When positions of authority do things with them rather than to us or for us, or not at all, right? So, I mean, we can't expect people to change if people around them aren't being supportive of a change, right? So, and so it's not only authority, but influence. And I'm thinking of our folks on this call today. Lori, you have kind of more of a positional authority, but many of us just have influence with people who've been harmed or whatever, or have caused harm. So when we look at this window, we want to be in the with frame, right, of being restorative. And that's with, how do you, as a person who works with victims and those who've offended, how do you stay within the with window and not get into, you know, you're just doing it for them in either a good way or in a way that is punitive. And I think, you know, we think, oh, we're going to do that to them or for them. We think for sometimes is to. But how do you stay within that with window so you're not doing things for everyone, or you haven't gotten so burned out that you're just, I'm done, you know, I'm not doing another thing. Or I'm going to make sure this person gets what, quote, they deserve. So how do you stay in that with frame there? And I know that's a hard question. And this is more about self-care, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, honestly, for all of it, I mean, I think everybody on here is caring and wants to help others. And I think a lot of times when somebody's not getting it, we want to take action. We want to do it for them. We want to go ahead and make those phone calls or do things for them. And we need to step back and give them tools. And we need to listen to what, you know, their needs are. And sometimes when you step back, you think, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I see why this person can't do this, or they're not able to. I see why. So sometimes there are those situations where there are these boundaries, or not boundaries, laws, that person is not really, you know, maybe they're being, somebody's being biased and judgmental. And we need to really think about and help whoever that is. Maybe it's the community, people in the community that are being biased towards someone. You know, maybe they have bias towards a crime victim. All crime victims are very angry. They just want punishment. They just want, you know, they're angry. They want punishment. You know, on the other hand, you know, all offenders are bad. All offenders, all they want to do is just keep going back incarcerated or whatever. You know, things like that. So we need to be that person and that guide to help direct people to listen and think. Not all people are alike. We are all individual. We all have different perspectives and different ways of looking at things. And we need to help people to see, you know, differences. and how, those, step back and look at some actions and maybe even show people those actions that they can, help someone with. Without, and giving them tools to be able to do that. But there are times, again, where there are walls, and we have to help, bring down those walls, even if it's a little bit at a time to help somebody. And I think that's just certainly very important for all of us. I can't hear.
Sorry. Thank you for that insight first, Lori, on those last two slides. And we went over the last one. This is just another visual of the one that was just before it. And so we're going to do some more training on affective statements, questions, and listening circles and impromptu conversations at the end of the month. So we invite you all to come back and develop some skills around these restorative practices in that framework. But we have about, what do we have? We have about 8 minutes left, and we've already kept Lori longer than I said. So thank you, Lori, for the grace in staying with us and just really providing us some fantastic guidance and wisdom and insight. Do you all have any more questions for Lori or anything to piggyback on what she said? And just, again, this is our learning space, and we do have collective wisdom among us. So, and by no means are Jamie or I, and I would say, Lori's way more experienced than we are and an expert much more than we are, but we're all learning from each other. Mm-hmm. At the same time. So anybody have anything for Lori or any final comments before we wrap up?
Just I wanted to say thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you for the work you do. Invaluable.
Yes.
Yes, you're a blessing to a lot of people, Lori. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori, for your insight too. I just wanted to say thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori.
We're gonna keep you as a group lifted up in prayer because of what you do is not easy, and there are burdens associated with it. So thank you so much for helping us out here.
Oh, you guys are amazing, and like I said, I think if this partnership between us, I think that will be so wonderful that we can kind of hear both sides and come to help others in that way. Take those walls down between restorative justice.
It does.
It's an honor to be here today, and I think.
Jamie, did you want to mention something about Good Samaritans and victim care?
Yeah, we're getting started with our Good Samaritan ministry, and one of the things we're wanting to do is to train Stephen ministers to work with victims and walk with them as kind of the after people. Once things have kind of settled back down into a routine, people still need that one-on-one conversation and relationship to continue working through their next steps. And Good Samaritan Ministry is a new signature initiative for All In Community that we're going to be working with to get Stephen ministers to work with victims or survivors of crime, offenders when they're coming back into society, as well as family members for both sides, their immediate family members. So I look forward to working with you more directly in that sense. I'm really excited about some of the feedback I'm getting already with some churches down here and moving forward in this vision of continued care for these people.
Within our lane, right?
Yeah.
within the Stephen. Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of out Lori because last time we talked, she is a United Methodist. So sometimes things change. It was like over a year ago, and we understand that. But Lori, you're probably familiar with Stephen Ministers a little bit. And so we just feel that they bring to the table just some of that training and that equipping that has such transferable skills to just creating that new community with folks who've experienced harm and crime. And so we will probably circle back around to you to help us kind of figure out how to make that a really good partnership, and bring some Stephen ministry groups into work side by side with what you do. So I hope that's okay.
That sounds wonderful. And actually, I'm going to approach our pastor and share some of the information as I was doing research, and some of the information as far as what November is restorative justice awareness.
Yeah,
Sure.
Different things. And is there something in February? Something going on in February too, or maybe, I don't know, maybe not.
yeah. I don't know. I have to look at all. But we, yeah.
Very interesting for me. And I do want to share something on a personal note, that when everything happened with my sister, I just completely out of control, lost, all control of everything in my world. But what I started to do is I did self-help for myself here, and I started journaling. And each day I would journal and say something about what was happening that day. But at the end of every single page, I always wrote, God, please help me get through this. Please help me through. And I did that every single day. And it certainly, and I think, certainly you guided me and directed me to where I need to be in this field. So
Thank you.
I appreciate all of you.
No.
Oh, thank you. And thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing.
Thank
What
you.
a wonderful testimony and witness.
Yes.
Yeah, God is good. God is
All the
good.
time.
And God
All
is
the
faithful.
time.
God is
All the
faithful
time.
too. So,
All the time.
yeah. So having said that, just a couple things, resources we use today. And so we would totally recommend these. And Lori, I don't know if you have another resource that you could throw in as a suggestion as well. That would be great. If not, that's okay as well. I think this is a good place for us to start.
Yes.
That's excellent. That's one I would have suggested.
Definitely. Yeah, this one, the restorative justice. And it really is a little book.
Yeah, it's a little book.
It's not very long at all. And there is also the Restorative Justice Institute at Eastern Mennonite University. And we'll actually send you a link to, it's a document that how to live restoratively. So we'll send you the link to that's out of that institution, which is, Mr. Zare is the chair of that, of course, area, because he's like one of the founders. So just a couple of reminders, our webinars, we are recording this, and we'll post this one in our webinar page. And then the International Institute for Restorative Practices has some phenomenal work on restorative practices, and that's, the science of human dignity is where I got that information. There's a thing called the relational care ladder for victims and for trauma, folks who've experienced trauma. So just some really great stuff. Our Ministry Monday, I mentioned, actually at the end of this month, we're doing Hope Letters information session. The one on restorative practices and listening circles is, it must be next month or the month after that. So, but Hope Letters is our ministry with individuals who are incarcerated that are coming home to your local community. Patients is part of that. And we can use our restorative practices and our restorative questions, affective statements, those kind of things in our writing and in our correspondence and encouragement for individuals that are incarcerated. And then we're doing a Doing Justice series. This is new. It's in February. February 3rd is our first one. February 3rd. April is the first Thursday of February, April, July, September. And we're going to be exploring, what does it mean to be doing, well, what is justice? And then how do we do justice through our words, through our systems and structures? And we talked about that a little today, that our human systems are made up of human beings. And so if we want to change those, if we want more just systems, we have to be more just people in those systems. And then through our service, because sometimes, particularly in the church, we think we're doing justice and we're not. And so how do we move toward more justice focused service and mission? And then the last one is justice through discipleship, which is really what we're called to do. So thank you for joining us today. And we are ending at 12:01. So thank you again, Lori. Thank you
Yes.
for being with us. And for each one of you who were able to join today, thank you for being here, enriching the environment, sharing your wisdom. We hope that this was valuable. We hope it was helpful. We hope that that it will propel you into being a restorative justice practitioner and a person of justice, wherever you are serving and whomever you are, whomever God is bringing into your care is the way I like to say it. So thank you. Peace be with you. And if you need anything, we are here for you and with you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Good
Bye.
night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.